In the suffocating heat above the Strait of Hormuz, something moved that no radar should have seen. Not a missile, not a drone. Something faster, smarter, invisible, until it was already too late. And in that moment, Iran's entire strike strategy began to collapse. Because what was supposed to be a show of dominance turned into a catastrophic exposure. But then, everything escalated. Iran had spent years preparing for this exact scenario. Layered missile batteries along its southern coast, fast attack boats hidden between commercial shipping lanes, drone swarms designed to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. The plan was simple, brutal, effective. Shut down the strait, control the world's oil artery, force global powers to negotiate on Iran's terms. And at first, it worked. Tankers slowed. Insurance rates exploded. Global markets trembled within hours. But beneath that success, something was already going wrong. Because Iran's doctrine depended on saturation. Overwhelm the enemy with numbers. Force mistakes. Create chaos. However, this time, there was no chaos. There was silence. And that silence meant one thing. The United States was already inside the battlefield. Not visibly, not loudly, but deeply embedded across every layer of the fight. What happened next changed everything. The first phase didn't begin with explosions. It began with disappearance. Iranian radar stations along the coastline began reporting anomalies, blips appearing, then vanishing, signals distorting, then going dark. At first, commanders assumed interference, electronic noise, routine disruption. But then, entire tracking grids went offline, simultaneously, across multiple sectors. And that's when the first strike came in. Not from the sky, from nowhere. A precision-guided impact slammed into a mobile missile launcher before it could even fire. No warning, no detection, just impact. Seconds later, another, and another. Launch systems that had taken years to build, destroyed in minutes. Iran's commanders were confused, because there were no incoming aircraft signatures, no cruise missile trails, nothing. However, the sky was already compromised, because above them, something was hunting. The second phase began in total darkness. High above the Gulf, stealth platforms had already taken position. Not just fighters, but something far more advanced. Aircraft designed not just to evade radar, but to rewrite the battlefield itself. F-35 formations moved like ghosts across the airspace. Their sensors fused into a single network. Every movement tracked, every signal analyzed. But then, something else joined them. Something that shouldn't exist in this theater. Next-generation electronic warfare systems. These weren't just jamming signals. They were hijacking them. Iranian drones launched in waves. But instead of reaching their targets, they began drifting, turning. Some even reversed direction. Operators on the ground watched in disbelief as their own drones lost control mid-flight. Because they weren't being destroyed. They were being taken. This changed everything. Iran's greatest advantage. Its massive drone arsenal was no longer a weapon. It was a liability. But the real shock was still coming. Because the third phase revealed the truth. This wasn't just defense. It was a trap. Days before the first missile was launched, U.S. assets had already mapped Iran's entire strike network. Launch sites, command nodes, communication relays, all identified, all targeted. So when Iran initiated its offensive, it unknowingly activated every tracked position at once. And that's when the system responded. Simultaneously, precision strikes hit command centers. Data links were severed mid-transmission. Missile batteries were neutralized before second launches. Iran wasn't just being countered. It was being dismantled in real time. But then, something even more alarming happened. The strait itself began to reopen. Not through negotiation, not through diplomacy, but through control. U.S. naval assets moved into coordinated positions. Destroyers formed a layered shield. Submarines operated silently beneath the surface. And above them, constant aerial surveillance. Nothing moved without being seen. Nothing launched without being intercepted. Iran's attempt to choke the world's energy supply was slipping away. However, the cost of that failure was massive. Because now, Iran had a choice: escalate further, or accept strategic defeat. And history has shown that moments like this are the most dangerous of all. Because when a strategy collapses this fast, desperation takes over. And desperate moves don't follow predictable rules. Right now, tensions are at a breaking point. For every system neutralized, another could be activated. For every drone lost, a missile could replace it. And somewhere in the dark waters of the Gulf, assets are still moving, unseen, unconfirmed, waiting, because this isn't over. Not even close. The question now is, if Iran pushes further, what else is waiting to be revealed? Because what remained hidden was far more dangerous than what had already been used. Beneath the surface of the Arabian Sea, far beyond the reach of conventional detection, something was already in position. Silent, untraceable, armed. And Iran had no idea it was there. But then, new signals began to emerge. Fragments of communication, short bursts of encrypted data, unusual naval movement along Iran's southern ports. At first, it seemed routine. However, analysts quickly realized the pattern didn't match standard operations. This wasn't defense. This was preparation. Because Iran wasn't backing down. It was shifting strategy. What happened next pushed the conflict into an entirely new phase. Instead of launching large-scale drone swarms, Iran began deploying smaller, more precise attack units. Fast boats equipped with anti-ship missiles, coastal batteries repositioned under hardened cover, mobile launchers constantly changing coordinates. This wasn't saturation anymore. This was adaptation. And it was far harder to counter. Within hours, the first signs of escalation appeared. A commercial tanker moving through a monitored corridor suddenly reported a near miss. A missile had passed within meters, then vanished into the sea. No impact. No confirmation. Just a warning. But then, a second attempt followed. This time, interception systems activated instantly. A U.S. destroyer locked onto the incoming threat. Missile defense systems engaged. And in a flash, the projectile was gone. Neutralized mid-air. However, this was no random attack. It was a probe. A calculated test of response time. Iran was learning, measuring, adjusting. And that made the situation even more volatile. Because now, both sides were evolving in real time. But then, the fourth phase began. And this time, it wasn't defensive. It was decisive. High above the conflict zone, long-range strike platforms had already been waiting. Not visible. Not engaged. Until now, strategic bombers operating from extended-range positions initiated coordinated strike sequences. Precision-guided munitions locked onto hardened targets deep Dakhel-Iranian territory. Command bunkers. Missile storage facilities. Underground infrastructure. Targets that were never meant to be touched. And yet, they were hit. One after another. The strikes were surgical. Calculated. relentless. Iran's ability to coordinate large-scale operations began to fracture. Communication delays increased. Response times slowed. Command chains broke under pressure. This changed everything. Because without coordination, even the most advanced systems become ineffective. But the most critical element was still unfolding. Because while the strikes continued above ground, a different kind of warfare was happening below. Cyber operations. Silent. Invisible. Devastating. Iranian defense networks began experiencing cascading failures. Targeting systems produced false data. Missile guidance software malfunctioned mid-sequence. Some systems simply shut down. Others operated with corrupted inputs. And in warfare, that's worse than failure. Because it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty destroys decision-making. Iran's battlefield awareness was collapsing. Piece by piece. Layer by layer. But then came the moment no one expected. An attempted coordinated strike failed completely. Multiple launch systems activated simultaneously. Missiles fired. But within seconds, something went wrong. Trajectory deviations. Guidance errors. Loss of control. Several missiles veered off course, falling harmlessly into open water. Others never reached full range. It was a complete breakdown. And for the first time, Iran's offensive capability didn't just weaken. It backfired. Spectacularly. Because every failed launch revealed positions. Every malfunction exposed vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities were immediately exploited. Follow-up strikes targeted the exposed systems, neutralizing them permanently. But even now, the situation remains unstable. Because despite the losses, Iran still retains significant capabilities. Hidden launch sites, underground facilities, reserve forces not yet deployed, and perhaps most concerning, unconventional options. Because when conventional warfare fails, nations don't just stop. They escalate differently. Right now, global powers are watching closely. Energy markets remain on edge. Military forces across the region are on high alert. One miscalculation, one overreaction, could trigger something far bigger than a regional conflict. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not just a battlefield. It's a global pressure point. And pressure points have a breaking limit. So now the question isn't who has the advantage. The question is, how far is each side willing to go? Because if this continues, the next phase won't just be about a sitar at Al-Madiq. It could redefine the balance of power across the entire region. And maybe far beyond it. So what do you think? Did Iran underestimate what it was really up against? Or is the most dangerous move still yet to come? Because even after everything that had already happened, there was still one layer no one had fully seen. Not on radar. Not in satellite imagery. Not even in intercepted communications. And yet, it was there, waiting. But then, something unusual happened inside Iran's command structure. Orders began to slow. Not stop, but hesitate. Field units reported delays in authorization. Launch crews waited seconds longer than usual. And in modern warfare, seconds matter. Because those seconds meant one thing. Uncertainty had reached the top. What happened next was not an explosion. It was a realization. Iran's leadership began to understand that this was no longer a conventional confrontation. This wasn't just about missiles and drones. It was about control of the entire battlespace. Air, sea, cyber, electromagnetic spectrum, all dominated at once. And that kind of dominance is almost impossible to break. However, Instead of stepping back, Iran made a critical decision. A final escalation attempt. One that could either reset the battlefield or end the confrontation entirely. Within hours, activity surged across multiple hidden locations. Mobile launchers rolled out from underground facilities. Coastal missile units powered up simultaneously. Fast attack naval groups moved into coordinated positions. This wasn't random. This was synchronized. A last attempt to overwhelm the system. But then, the signal was detected. Not by a single radar, but by an integrated network already watching everything. And instantly, the response triggered. This was the fifth phase. The most advanced. The most decisive. And the most devastating. Because this time, the system didn't wait. It predicted. Using real-time data fusion from satellites, airborne sensors, and naval platforms, launch patterns were identified before activation. Think about that for a moment. Before missiles even left their platforms, they were already targeted. And when Iran executed its synchronized strike, it walked directly into a pre-planned counter. Interceptors launched within seconds. Electronic warfare systems disrupted guidance signals mid-flight. Directed countermeasures blinded targeting systems. The sky over the strait turned into a battlefield of invisible forces. Missiles colliding with interceptors. Signals clashing in silence. Targets disappearing before impact. And within minutes, it was over. The largest coordinated strike Iran attempted in this conflict. Neutralized. Almost entirely. This changed everything. Because it proved something far more dangerous than any single strike. It proved that the system wasn't reacting anymore. It was anticipating. And once a military force reaches that level, the balance shifts permanently. Iran's strategic collapse wasn't sudden. It was systematic. Every failed operation reduced confidence. Every disrupted strike weakened coordination. Every exposed position increased vulnerability. And slowly, control slipped away. But the global consequences were just beginning. Because the Strait of Hormuz started to stabilize, shipping lanes reopened under heavy protection. Energy markets responded instantly. Oil prices began to drop from their peak volatility. However, the world had seen something it couldn't ignore. A new kind of warfare. Not defined by numbers. Not decided by sheer force. But by integration. By speed. By intelligence. And that realization sent shockwaves far beyond the Middle East. Major powers began reassessing their own capabilities. Military doctrines were questioned. Defense systems reevaluated overnight. Because if one network could dismantle an entire offensive strategy this quickly, what could it do elsewhere? But even now, the story isn't finished. Because Iran is still there. Still armed. Still capable. Still watching. And perhaps most importantly, still learning. Because every engagement reveals data. Every failure teaches adaptation. And nations under pressure evolve fast. So while this phase may be ending, the next one is already forming. Somewhere beyond the visible battlefield. In classified facilities. In strategic command rooms. In systems being redesigned at this very moment, preparing for what comes next. Because in conflicts like this, there is no true ending. Only pauses. Only resets. Only the quiet before the next escalation. So now the real question is, if the next move comes, will it look anything like what we just witnessed? Or will it be something the world isn't ready for at all?